Um, Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to have people jumping into the first webinar of the day for the last day of the Global Guidance Summit. We're very excited to have you here at our International Admissions AMA session. So ask me anything or ask us anything, I suppose. So we have 5 great panelists presenting today, all AIRR-NA members representing 5 different country systems. And we're here to help answer any questions you have, large or small, general or specific, about international admissions. And I hope that if you've been able to attend some of the sessions over the last 3 days of the summit, that jogged a lot of questions and some things that you didn't get a chance to get answered in some of the shorter sessions. So this is your chance to start, asking those questions and getting some answers. So you can use the Q&A feature, and right now you can start adding in your questions. And that's what this session is for, is just a back and forth Q&A process. So we'll be moderating these questions and going through the hour, making sure you get all the information you need to help yourselves and your students and families. So while you're typing in those questions, we'll all introduce ourselves so you have a better idea of our background and where we're coming from. Since I'm already talking, I'll start. My name is Jim Pierson. I'm the senior regional manager for University College Dublin, which is a large public institution in Ireland. I've been with UCD for about 10, almost 11 years now, and I'm based in the Chicago area. So I'll pass it on to Gabriela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriela Mendez. I'm with Middlesex University, London, and I have been with them for about 10 years. I was also a student at Middlesex University, so I can relate with all of your students and their questions about visas, studying abroad, what Middlesex is all about. And I am based right outside of New York City. Pass it on to Emma.
Thank you so much. My name is Emma Schwartz, and I am the regional manager for James Cook University in Australia. And I am based here in Southern California. I have been with James Cook for a couple years now, and I'm here to help with all your questions in regards to Australia. And our university is a bit of a smaller regional university, but it's incredible up in tropical North Queensland. I will pass it off to Sarah.
Good morning, I guess good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Sarah Smith. I am with the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I've been with St. Andrews for about 5 years, and I'm based in Colorado. I'm one of 2 regional managers that cover the US. And last but not least, switch you over to Canada.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Tomoka Mano. I am the Associate International Student Recruiter and Advisor for the University of British Columbia. UBC is a large university on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver and Kelowna. And I've been with UBC for 2 years now, going into my 3rd year. And I am based in Rochester, New York.
Move forward.
All right, wonderful. So we have some questions already. Thank you so much. Please keep them coming. But we also wanted to kind of show what we as recruiters see as commonly asked questions. So if this can prompt any of your questions, please go for it. But I will start right away. The first question is, to what degree do institutions look at transcripts and rigor as opposed to US holistic review? If a student has SAT, ACT, and AP tests and maybe college courses, is that somehow more indicative / beneficial that a transcript for a school in the international uni may not know? Who would like to get us started with this, with answering this question?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. I mean, generally, I think Irish universities are simple in that for almost all of our courses, we only look at academics. We don't look at anything outside of academics. There's nothing like a holistic review you'd see in the US. We will look at all academics, though, so I think that's where this all balances out. So Irish universities generally will look at any combination a student has of any academic background, whether that's high school GPA, ACT, SAT, AP scores, college scores, IB, whatever they've done. But unless you're applying for a highly specialized program like medicine or veterinary medicine, we won't read essays, we don't look at extracurriculars, we don't look at letters of rec. And I think you'll generally see in Irish universities and a lot of international curricula that there's a lot more emphasis on standardized exams than on high school grades, because generally there's no standardization in American high schools. So there's no way for anyone to look at one school over another and decide whether one's more or less rigorous or higher or better quality. So it is harder to do that kind of like in-depth transcript review that US schools will do of like, is this a rigorous curriculum and did they take enough honors classes, enough APs, things like that. There'll be much more of an emphasis on those exam scores. So I guess anyone else might be different for other countries.
Yeah, I'll pop in, and I think I can probably speak for all of us when most of the questions that you ask, we're going to have an "it depends" answer. And honestly, it just requires students and their counselors to do a lot of extra digging and learning about each university. But I can speak for St. Andrews and saying that we are not holistic at all in the sense of the US university, but maybe a little bit more so than a lot of our other UK universities. We do look at, if you're applying Common App, we don't read the Common App essay, but we do have some questions that we're going to look at, pay attention to. But primarily it is going to be, like Jim said, the transcript. We're test optional, so we do have some options there. But again, it's going to vary a little bit by, again, what subject you're applying to and what faculty.
I can speak on Australia a bit if we want to keep speaking on the different systems, but it is also academic based. It depends on the university. Again, there's about 40 institutions in Australia and they range. So you've got top tier research institutions that might ask for an AP, but James Cook University will only look at academic transcripts from high school. So there is a range, but again, definitely based on the academics and the suitability for the program.
I can jump in for Canada. For Canada, again, like all the same thing of it depends, but for the most part, it is pretty much focused on academics and the courses. Rigor does help, of course. There are some universities like UBC who go slightly more holistic, where we do ask for essays, but there's also other universities who might also ask for short essays depending on the program that they're applying for, but not necessarily when it comes to extracurricular activities. So for the most part, it's usually just academics and potentially even essays, but those are what we really focus on most.
Thank you, Tomoka. Yes, I agree with all of my colleagues here. I do want to throw out two things or mention two things. Number one is that, of course, American universities abroad will be completely different. We don't have any rep from American universities abroad here, but do consider that it's going to be very similar to the US and to US universities. And the second thing that I wanted to mention is that you will find among universities out there, and some British universities even, although rare, some will be test flexible or completely test optional. I would say the minority of us would be, but you will find universities out there and even amongst AIRR-NA peers that do not require SATs, ACTs, APs, IBs. It will just take a student with a certain or minimum GPA. I also wanted to mention, finally, that we mainly, especially for those universities that I just mentioned that are test optional, the first filter will be the student's academic, right? The transcript, so to speak. But then if they're applying for performing arts or an artistic program, there may be a more of a weight in their portfolio or in their audition than in their GPA. So do factor those things out if you have students in any of those scenarios. All right, so let's jump right into the next question, which is also quite related. How do we read an application for a student that has not had access to IB or APs? I will go around the room and kind of like see what each of our institutions consider. But let's say there's a student who has no APs, no IB, just a regular US high school diploma from their district. How would UCD or Irish universities in general consider these, Jen?
I think in a lot of ways, the student will be in a tough place depending on what they want to study. If they want to go into arts and humanities or something, they might be totally fine. But if they want to go into law, engineering, clinical courses, they're going to need advanced coursework, and they'll need either IBs or APs, or they'll need some kind of community college experience. So generally, we're looking for strong academics, and UCD is very kind of rigid in our requirements. You need to meet the exact requirements of the course you're going into. The flip side of that, though, and most Irish institutions are the same, is that it's very transparent. So a student will know before they apply what they need to get in, and it'll say if you need 1 or 2 or 3 AP scores to get into the course. So you'd know before you submit the application whether you're competitive for entry. So at least students know in advance whether they're competitive or not, or which courses might be a good fit for them. And like UCD's entry requirements page for US students, we have every course we offer, and then there's one column for what you need to get in if you don't have any test scores, and then another column if you do have test scores, and it at least gives students an idea of where they stand. So it's not very flexible, but it is very transparent, which I think is the benefit of the system. So we are more towards the test required side, though it's not for all of our courses.
I guess we'll just keep it going the same order we did before. For St. Andrews, yeah, we want to see, similar to what Jim said, a rigorous course load. Just to make the differentiation, though, if the high school doesn't offer AP or IB, we're going to look and see if there's something else that you have offered, like honors courses or whatever it may be. So it's okay if they don't have that moniker of AP or IB, as long as there's some sort of rigor. But yeah, especially for some of the hard sciences and mathematics and things like that, we just don't want students starting behind the 8 ball from day one. So it will be pretty hard to get entrance without some higher level courses.
I'll speak on Oceania. I want to speak on New Zealand really quick, that it's completely based on transcripts and the test optionals. So they, yeah, it's a really accessible way for students to apply with their high school transcript. And for Australia, you have, again, a range of institutions. There's the group of 8, which will be the top 8 universities in Australia, and then the regional universities, or the universities that might not be a part of the group of 8, that will really be flexible with that high school transcript. And it's important to know that there are options out there that will accept the high school transcript and not the higher level coursework, but very important that our institutions are typically very transparent about that. So you will know whether or not your student really has a great chance of getting in or not. And that's the incredible thing about international admissions, is that it is more transparent, and you will give your student, you know, the best possible chance of getting in if you know what we state on our website, through Australian websites specifically.
For Canadian universities, we're also very transparent, like we all mentioned. It will be listed, but depending on the program, it might be a little bit more strict than others, like engineering or the sciences. But there's also sometimes shown for equivalency. So if there are no AP or IB courses at your school, or even honors courses, whatever is equivalent to that, it could be like 2 years of chemistry, things like that. But the admissions office at that university will usually reach out and ask if there are similarities, or we might even ask for your school programs that is offered for the classes. And if there's no equivalencies to that, we might even recommend you to take a class before the summer starts if you are a highly qualified student. So again, I would just recommend double checking on the university websites to see what could be equivalent to what you might have at your school as well.
Thank you, Tomoka. And I want to circle back to the UK. As I mentioned before, a lot of institutions, and you'll be surprised to find how many of us are completely test optional. At Middlesex University, we are test flexible. So some programs, the STEM programs, will require at least 2 AP exams or IB scores. But if they don't have this, and they're going for a humanities degree, a business degree, law, it's completely fine. They don't need it. And again, you'll be surprised again how other universities, and I'm going to name a few: London, Met, Roehampton, I believe they are part of AIRR-NA, will also be completely test optional regardless of the program that students are applying for. So finally, I do want to plug in our resources. Use your resources. We have an AIRR-NA website where all of our institutions are, and you can click on our institution's webpage and find out what each entry requirement is for American students, and what exceptions we make. Our email addresses are there. You can email us and kind of like ask us questions. If a certain statement is not clear, we're happy to answer questions for you. And you can go on each university's website and you'll probably, I want to say 100% of the time, find a USA webpage where you will find the entry requirements specific for US students. So it'll talk about honors, dual enrollment. It will talk about APs, IB, etc. So please use your resources, and that is a great question. Thank you so much for asking. The next question is going to be sorry?
Can I just take the previous question a step further? So what would everyone do for a student that doesn't have standard grades? So we occasionally see students that go to schools that issue narrative transcripts as opposed to letter grades or number grades, or students that are homeschooled that don't have a standard diploma. And I think that's a question that comes up a lot and that we work a lot, especially with IECs that are working with students from a broad variety of backgrounds. So how would we all look at those students in our application review?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, it will depend on what they want to study. And I'm speaking only for Middlesex University, but it will depend on what they want to study. And we would want to see some sort of official transcript, not a handwritten transcript, for example. So it may be also that if a student is homeschooled, we may ask for an SAT, for example, just to kind of prove the student has to demonstrate that they're able to study at undergraduate level. So having those tests in place would really, really help. And we do take it on a case by case. So don't be afraid to come and ask.
I would say the exact same thing. And we're going to look and see if on the homeschooling side of things, if they're used in, some sort of accredited curriculum would be important. And I think most Scottish schools would do the same. They'll look case by case, but scores would be absolutely necessary in the homeschooling case I think I can speak for most Scottish schools in that regard.
The same for Australia as well. I think a lot of times counselors, all the counselors here in this webinar, we are here to help as well. So if a university has an in-country rep, we're very accustomed to US applications, very accustomed to the wide range of transcripts that we receive. So we're in touch with our international admissions department constantly, helping decipher, helping understand these different backgrounds. So we're all here to help, but accustomed to the wide range. So we're here to help decipher.
Yes, for Canada as well, we're also very similar in ways where if you don't have grades, we'll just look at what the pattern is for how it's evaluated for each class, as well as we might even ask for an SAT or an ACT or even an AP exam, depending on what program it is as well. So it really is case by case basis. So similar answers as well.
Yeah, Ireland would be pretty similar, where if a student doesn't have an official transcript, like if it's a homeschool student and the transcript was written in Microsoft Word by their parent, then that wouldn't cut it for us. But if they did like a homeschool program via Florida Virtual Online School, then that would be fine. I'd say one thing that comes up occasionally, there are some schools that don't issue letter or number grades, but the counselor of the school can provide those on request, though they wouldn't provide them to the student. And we can take that in some cases. So if there is flexibility within the school, there might be options for the student, but that's definitely something where students and families or counselors should be reaching out to people like us much earlier in the application process than normal to see what's best for them.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you for throwing that curveball, Jim. That was good. All right, so the next question is for Sarah and I, the British institutions. When using the UCAS system, how important is it that the students use a teacher of reference in the specific choice they are selecting, i.e., a student wanting to apply to psychology at Oxford using her senior AP Psych teacher? I will let you answer, Sarah, first, but I will remind everyone here, because I don't know how many. Well, we have 50 participants, but UCAS is the application system used for British universities. So anywhere, any university, any conservatory in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. For Irish universities, you can apply directly. For any other country, you can apply directly to those universities. But specifically in the UK, we use the UCAS system. And having said that, Sarah, what would you answer?
Sure. It depends. I can't speak to Oxford, obviously. For St. Andrews, and I think I can speak for other Scottish universities here, is that if you're applying to psychology, it's quite possible you didn't take psychology in high school. Not all high schools offer it. So I would say in our case, we want someone that can speak to a student's passion for their subject and a student's ability as academically. So that may be the teacher in that area, but in our case, it doesn't necessarily have to be. And then we may get to this, but at some point we should discuss the UCAS a little bit more. I've had so many questions in other sessions that just keep in mind, since we're talking about UK universities here, you can only apply to 5 programs. So just keep that one in mind. I don't know. That's the best answer I have as far as recommendations go, though.
Yeah. So what I would say is to keep it short and sweet, yes, that would be the best practice. If a student is applying for medicine, they should have their biology teacher. If they're applying for, I don't know, any other, whatever field they're applying for, have the best teacher speak on their behalf. That would be the best practice. Does this mean that if there is no AP Psych teacher, or if that teacher doesn't write their reference letter, the whole application is going to fall apart? No. However, I would say the best practice and the recommendation would be for the best qualified teacher to speak on behalf of that student. So yes, thank you for that question. Now moving on to the next question, unless Jim did want to add
I
something.
just want to plug that we had a great session on the UK with UCAS 101 on Monday afternoon, and all the sessions from this week were recorded and will be posted on our website the week of September 2nd. So if you do want to catch up on that UCAS 101, if you couldn't make it, we got great resources there. And then if you have more questions, you can reach out to Sarah and Gabriela later.
Sweet, thank you. All right, so I'm going to let more of us speak. So let's talk about this. Let's ask this question by one of our attendees. What is the best way for a student to find a specific program in different regions? For example, if a student wants to find a marketing program or a chemical engineering program, how do they find a program? Like, is there a search system like Niche or the College Board search tool for finding programs abroad? How does that work? That is a great question. What tools can counselors and families use to find the best programs in their fields? Is there such a tool? I wonder.
Something you can use the AIRR-NA website for is most commonly, most countries or regions will have some kind of country level organization or office that promotes higher education in that region, and they usually have something like that. So Education in Ireland is the government organization that promotes education in Ireland. It's on the label around the world, and they have a search feature where you can find courses at different universities, and there's similar things in most countries, most of the countries represented in AIRR-NA have that. And if you go to the resources page on the AIRR-NA website, we have links out to most of those country systems.
Yep, for the UK, it's the British Council website.
I also want to add that in AIRR-NA, we have a subject matrix. So you can find what each university teaches. That is a really good resource. Yeah, I think that's probably the best resource that I can plug. But right, for the UK would be the British Council as well. Emma, Tomoka, do you have any comments?
Yes, Study Australia. So again, those government websites that can give you a broad overview of programs, of visa advice. It's really well run. And yeah, there are centralized systems within Australia like QTAC, which would be the Queensland University search tool, but that is for domestic students. I just want to mention that would list all Queensland universities, but that's just for domestic students, but you can use it as a search tool perhaps.
For Canada, it would be EduCanada. That's like the most basic one overall that you can start off with. But I did find one that I came across the other day. It's called universitystudy.ca. That can be filterized depending on the program. I haven't played around with it too much, but that could be a start as well if you wanted to check that out as well.
I think
Great,
this is one of
thanks.
those areas that's so hard, and one of the harder parts of going abroad is that the same resources you're used to using for US or domestic Canadian students aren't always there when you're looking abroad, that you won't have like the same Department of Education resources or cost of study options. So it does take a lot more research, and I usually encourage students and families looking abroad to start their research earlier than they would if they're staying closer to home. But then this is also where us here on the panel and all of our fellow AIRR-NA members are great resources. I've heard every AIRR-NA member present at one point or another. So if you ask me where a student can study marketing, I probably know 3 or 4 AIRR-NA members in different areas that can provide that for you. So reaching out to AIRR-NA generally or anyone here and saying you have a student interested in a certain subject area or that has specific interests, we can usually refer you on to anyone in our membership pretty easily.
And just to add to that, the AIRR-NA membership is extremely collaborative. We are all happy to point students to where we think they would be a good fit. So there's not a lot of people trying to just get students for themselves. We are all really happy to point you to the right place or share information with a colleague. So definitely use this organization because we collaboratively have quite a bit of experience and a good knowledge base.
Totally agree. And 2 final resources, please write this down, especially for students who want to apply to the UK. UCAS is actually a great search tool. Okay, so UCAS, UCAS, UCAS.com, and the National Student Survey. Now, I probably won't tell you how ranked a university is in a specific area, but it will definitely tell you how satisfied students are with the teaching, with the assessments, with the students, with everything, the cafeteria, things like that. So the National Student Service, Survey, NSS, would be a really good resource for those of you trying to kind of find universities that are worth applying for in a specific area versus others, or subjects versus others. All right, for EU schools, do EU dual citizen students have a modified admissions process? Like, is it guaranteed or is it easier compared to domestic students? I specifically have this question for an Austrian dual citizen who's applying to schools in Austria, Germany, Netherlands, and Ireland. So this is an EU national. Are there any benefits, advantages as an EU student that other US students might not get in these countries specifically? What do we say to that?
As the representative of the only EU country in the chat, sorry, UK, it is very complicated for Ireland specifically. Each EU country manages how they recognize and how they qualify students for EU fees, home fees differently. But Ireland is usually very disappointing and strict for most students because there are strict requirements on both residency and citizenship. So having EU or Irish citizenship doesn't automatically qualify you for EU fees. It's complicated, but the general rule is that a student or their family has to have lived within Ireland or the EU for 3 of the last 5 years before they start their studies to qualify for EU fees. Otherwise, regardless of citizenship, they'll pay non-EU fees, they'll apply as a non-EU student. There are benefits to that because the EU application process is through the Irish CAO, Common Application Office, and that is very difficult, and students applying to Irish universities through the CAO don't find out where they got into university until 2 or 3 weeks before term starts. So students starting in September this year are finding out this week whether they got into an Irish university, which would be unthinkable for North Americans to wait that long generally. So they hate the process, whereas EU citizens applying through the non-EU process will get their offer in line with other Americans or Canadians. So starting October, November, the year before study. So it is to the benefit of these students to reach out early because qualification varies by country and by institution sometimes. So they should reach out to see whether they qualify for EU fees at a certain institution and whether their application pathway will be different because of that.
We get that question a lot. I think Gabriela and I could both say we hear that a lot. I have a British passport, but to Jim's point, as far as tuition fees go, it's really based on where you're domiciled, and it's really hard to prove otherwise and say, oh, I'm going to go live with my aunt in London for a few months. Can I get British fees, which are considerably lower than the international fees, but really hard to do.
I know this wasn't a question.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go.
Okay, I was going to say, I know that it wasn't the Oceania question, but if you do hold a passport from New Zealand or Australia, you do receive domestic fees. So huge bonus to applying to Oceania.
Same with, please, my peers, correct me if I'm wrong, but since I'm an AIRR-NA, I think I'm entitled to say this. Same with Swiss students, right? They get Swiss fees. That's what I've heard from our many presentations. Please double check on that. But that's a great advantage. And back to your point, Sarah, sure, students won't get, even if they have a British passport coming to British universities, they won't get that tuition fee, but it's still advantageous. So it's still beneficial to go back to the UK and study because they don't need a visa. They can stay for as long as they want. They can work full time. There are many advantages. So I would still encourage a student, even if they're paying higher fees than a local student, it may still save them a lot of time and money versus paying a US university. So that's one thing. Anybody want to add anything else to this?
Sorry, I forgot to say something.
No, go ahead,
About
Emma.
the domestic fees. I'm so sorry, Tomoka. They would have to apply through those centralized domestic systems. I mentioned QTAC already, but that is the domestic system, and they will be labeled as a domestic student with that passport. So that's unique. But QTAC for Queensland, you've got UAC, these AC centralized domestic systems. Just a quick note for that.
And then for Canada, if you are a dual citizen or if you have full Canadian citizenship, as long as you should provide that proof of citizenship, you will be receiving domestic tuition fees for the most part. It may depend from province to province, but for the most part, that is something that can be possible as well.
Awesome. Okay. Next question. If a student is only applying to one and only one UK university, should they apply direct? Sarah, I'll let you answer this one.
I would say if they're using the Common App, they should use the Common App to apply. And if the other university, if the UK university they're applying to has it, that it doesn't, there's no advantage to applying direct as far as like, you know, some students have the misconception that, oh, it'll show that I'm really interested in this program, but it doesn't. I would say like less than 3% of our students from the US use that direct app. So I personally just think it's easier to add it to the Common App. But if the university is not on the Common App and they're not applying to any others, then yeah, direct application is probably quite a bit easier if you're not familiar with UCAS or your counselor's not familiar with the UCAS, or you aren't familiar with the UCAS, I should say, because it can be a little bit confusing. It's all English, but it definitely needs some translation. So like Jim said, if your student's gonna use the UCAS, go back to that UCAS 101.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And yes, in short, should they apply direct? Sure, they can. They should apply direct. They should definitely not apply direct and only through UCAS if they're applying to more than one British universities. But if that one university that they want to apply to happens to be on a Common App, then go for it. If they accept direct applications, then of course, go for it as well. All right, next question. How do American students fare academically once they matriculate, particularly in UK, Ireland, where students may have an additional year of more focus or advanced study, like A levels? Okay, so the question is about like how are they academically? Are they competitive academically speaking? How is it possible that they can matriculate to a 3-year university even if they don't have A levels? Who would like to answer this?
Sure. I mean, for students coming to Ireland, I think Americans and Canadians tend to do very well academically, and that's part of the reason is that we have high academic requirements and they're rigid, and students that meet the requirements are supposed to be prepared for the course. I think students do very well in discussion-based settings, especially because Irish faculty love the discussions that Americans tend to bring. Americans tend to be more outspoken and vocal in classroom than their Irish peers in a lot of ways, just because of the way our education system is. So they fit in really well, and Irish faculty tend to appreciate that discussion-based kind of nature of the American education system. I think Americans tend to fall a little bit shorter in mathematics than their peers in Ireland more commonly, because depending on what curriculum they did, they might not be as well prepared for mathematics, and a lot of courses will have a strong math component. So I think that's something that students should be aware of. And the reason why we have strict requirements of you need AP, Calc, or Stats for a certain course is because maths is really intensive in a lot of courses at UCD, and you need to be prepared for that. I think we do have supports on campus, and most of our institutions would have some kind of support to help students catch up in maths, or study centers or tutors or something. But I think that's something that's a bit difficult. And then I think just the nature of education is very different, and that it's much more test heavy and far less continuous assessment. So if your student's a really good test taker, they'll do really well academically. And if they're a terrible test taker, it might be a bit of a struggle for them at first, because you don't usually get like homework every week and unit tests every other week and things like that. You can have 70% of your final grade be your final exam in Ireland, and that puts a lot of pressure on that one exam.
Just to add to that, I think the other thing that makes a successful student coming from the US is just one that's really independently minded and has really good time management skills, because they're going to be in class quite a bit less than they certainly have been in high school. So, and as Jim just said, there's going to be less frequency of grades. I'm not going to have that syllabus that tells them everything they need to be doing every day and how many chapters to read and check-ins and things like that. So they really have to be prepared for that. But I think many universities kind of post that first to second year retention rate. That's always a good one to look at. But I would say that the students that come to St. Andrews and to a lot of our Scottish universities do really well. It's a little bit of a transition, but and then just reiterate, like, math is probably the biggest one, as Jim said. That's probably the one that has the asterisk by it for most of our students that are applying to math.
Yeah, agreed. I think studying at our institutions is still challenging enough for students, especially coming from a no A-level background. However, it is still possible. It is still something that students can do and do very well. Throughout the board, I think that we'll find American students specifically performing very, very well in each of their fields. So they should not be afraid of competitiveness when they're faced with the option of studying at a British institution or an Irish institution. All right, can we talk about transferability of an international bachelor's degree to a US master's program? Is it possible? Is it impossible? How does that work? How does it transfer? Okay, we don't know the answer. I'm kidding.
Sorry, you cut out for me for a minute. Do you mind
Of course, I'll reread it. So the question is asking us to speak to transferability of international bachelor degrees to a US master's program. So how do international bachelor degrees transfer back to the US at master's level?
So the suitability for a program back in the States. I think one of the most common questions we get from parents and students, is this a real degree? It's 3 years. Is this accredited and real? And it certainly is. It's extremely rigorous, like we just spoke about. Rigorous gives you extremely great background in the academics you're studying, and it's more focused from year one. So you could say that transferability is extremely high for that acceptance rate. It does depend on the program and the university you're applying to back home in the States, but it's a really great degree from all of our AIRR-NA institutions, and I can speak on some alumni that came back and got their masters at UC San Diego, places like that, that they were able to get into, depending on the major, of course.
The one area that I think students have to be careful in, reiterating what Emma said, yes, absolutely. Our students come back and study all sorts of things, master's degrees all over at really amazing places in the US. Medical school is one area where it takes a little extra learning, understanding the process. So that one is like a whole nother conversation. But other than medical school, I think, students come back all the time. not an issue.
Yeah, and I think part of the misconception is that, students, friends, neighbors, even teachers at high school might have never heard of UCD or James Cook or, any of our institutions because we're not as familiar. We're not, playing football on Saturdays, so it's not a household name. But if you study environmental science at James Cook and you want to study environmental science at a master's level in the US, those faculty all know each other because those worlds are very small. So when you're staying within your subject area, when you're going on to something within your subject area, all of our institutions are really highly regarded and have, research connections and professional connections. So I think when you're going so deeply into your subject area at an international institution like ours that does do a lot more focus on your major, then it really sets you up well for success. And the kind of household nameness isn't as much of an issue because it's more based on the academics and the reputation within the field, which is usually very strong.
Great point. Great point, Jim. All right. Let's move on to the next question there. This counselor has been getting this question from parents quite often recently. Are we anticipating any future visa challenges for US students traveling abroad to study, especially in the UK or Canada, given the current political climate? Great question. Are there any future visa challenges for US students at any of our countries?
It tends to be hard for us to predict, but generally, if the US puts new restrictions on a country, that country will usually respond in kind at some point. And then it can be like a back and forth kind of thing. So it can happen, but then it's also, the countries are concerned about much more than just education. They're concerned about trade and, broader geopolitical climate. So they might be less willing to do that kind of tit for tat one-upsmanship because they don't want to damage relationships. So generally everything's chaotic and it's very hard to tell. But I don't know of anything specific for Ireland at least, but you do see that kind of occasionally as things kind of go back and forth. Nobody wants to take anything from the US changing and not respond to it.
I think if anything, the UK is quite happy to have some of the best and brightest considering coming over. And we're quite happy to have US students. So, but yeah, you never know. It's day to day, right?
Yeah, at least that we know of, we can't predict any future visa changes. I mean, anything could happen, but no, we're not aware of that. We deal with a lot of students, of course, so student visas and things have, in terms of timing, that has been improved. A lot of students are getting their visas faster, if anything. US students, and I'm speaking specifically for the UK, US students don't necessarily need to prove funds to get a UK student visa, which many other students around the world would have to. So they do get all these, I want to say, concessions and advantages by being US students. So in the grand scope or in the grand picture of things, US students are quite well positioned, at least for British visa process.
For the Canadian study permit process, it has been getting a little bit stricter, not just within the US students, but also just worldwide, with everything getting put into place the past few years. But I will say that we definitely are starting to not recommend as much to apply their study permit at the border for US students, just because it is starting to get more strict. And so our recommendation always is to make your study permit application as bulletproof as possible, and that you're following all directions so that you have a higher chance of being able to receive your study permit on time.
I think Australia wasn't necessarily a part of that question, but students have been receiving their visas within a couple of days lately. So we're really lucky on that fast turnaround for North American students specifically. It's been so far so good.
Great. All right. And then piggybacking on that question, given the potential for significant increases in application with decreased interest in the US, do we foresee any changes to a more holistic approach to review applications? And also, do we see any potential impact on research opportunities that might be available? Should I read it again?
No, well, Ireland won't change how we review applications, UCD at least. We still have the standards we have to stick to that's kind of equivalent to what Irish students have to meet to get into programs. I mean, we have seen increased interest starting from around November 5th last year, going through the roof in a lot of ways. And if anything, you can predict maybe slightly longer processing times for application because of the increased volume and how much work is going into reviewing these applications. But I think, it's a sign, as you say, that there is more of an interest in students looking abroad and looking outside of the US for options. But I think, if anything, there's been more and more headlines out of the EU and Europe and a lot of other regions about more research opportunities for students, for grad students, for PhD students in providing research, especially in areas that are maybe less supported in the US at the moment, like environmental science or gender studies or social justice. Those things are very strong areas in a lot of regions outside the US and will continue to be strong and have opportunities for them.
Yeah, I echo what Jim is saying. I don't think that our admissions process will change. In fact, I know that it won't change because it's based on the UK curriculum, not the US curriculum. So I don't think that we will go on a fully holistic review in the way that American universities do. But yes, I mean, the one thing that students might need to be aware of is maybe apply earlier, do things a little bit earlier because it may take a little longer as we see a surcharge in applications. All right. Next question, and we will take this back to qualifications. Are individual IB scores viewed like AP scores, or is a full IB diploma required to meet the entry requirements? What would our institutions do with this? Like, will we take individual IB classes, individual IB scores in lieu of AP scores? Or if a student is doing IB, they have to finish the full IB before we admit them? How would that be at each of our institutions?
We will be happy to look at IB scores, whether it's part of a whole diploma or not. We generally don't wait for the final diploma to come out anyway. We don't give very many conditional offers. So yeah, we're happy to look at a combination. We have students apply all the time that have a kind of a combination of honors classes, maybe an AP, maybe an IB class. So we're really looking for the rigor and a good solid transcript to go with it, with the grades.
Yeah, we look at IB exams, individual exam scores similar to APs, and we'll combine it with a US curriculum. UCD will look at either US curriculum with ACT, SAT, IB, APs all together, or we'll look at a full IB diploma score or predicted score, and then we can make a decision based on either one, depending on which benefits the student most. So in general for UCD, I encourage sending in as much as possible, and our test scores, we call it a do no harm policy. So regardless of your test score, how good or bad you think it is, send it in, and if it helps, we'll consider it. If it doesn't, we won't consider it.
I can speak on James Cook University. We, again, will look at the full academic profile in terms of what they send in, whether it be a diploma or certain courses. I will say there's two sides to JCU. There's the medicine and dentistry selection team, which is specifically very popular for Canadian students who apply. That will be looking at the full diploma, looking at the courses. So definitely reach out to us if your students are applying to medicine and dentistry. That would be a different process.
For UBC, we will take a look at the individual IB scores as well, whether it is on a full diploma or not. But if you are going through full diploma, I would recommend applying as full diploma. But if you are not doing the diploma program and just taking IB classes, that is still okay. You'll just apply separately as just like a US curriculum application. We'll just go from there as well. But either way, rigor is important for UBC. So that either way, that will help your application.
All right, so we have only about 10 minutes left, and I want to get all of these questions answered. So what I will do is kind of like select one person per question, if that's okay. Sarah, I'll start with you because this is a UK specific question. I noticed that some UK schools that take SAT/ACT require all of the scores. Is there a general rule of thumb as to how international universities handle test scores when required? For example, super score versus all score. Can you speak to your university and whatever you know about all universities out there in the UK?
Yeah, I think it's going to vary quite a bit. So we super score. We are test optional in many cases, and I'm sorry, I can't speak for everyone because everyone's changing quite a bit with I think just the nature of trying to get SATs in some parts of the country. I think universities all over the place are starting to realize that that can be problematic, and some offer them within their school and some don't. So sorry, but I'm going to have to go with a hard it depends on this one.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, I'll answer the next question. Some unis and some programs in the UK require specific tests, such as ESAT and TMUA for entrance, regardless of academic preparation. Is it of any benefit for an applicant to write these if they are not required? Would they be used at all in the applications or in the applicant's assessments? I want to say no. If it is not a requirement, I don't think it will be additionally beneficial. I don't think that this will put the students in the top of the line. So I would probably not advise a student to take those tests unless one out of the 4 UCAS universities requires it. So that is my short answer to that. And please feel free to follow up. Next question. My students who have enrolled in English and Scottish unis report a bit of a shock in adjusting to their grading scales, especially with the grade inflation in the US. Is this true in other countries as well? I'm going to have Jim and Emma answer very short answers on this.
Absolutely true. Students are constantly shocked when they come to Ireland at how low their grades are when they're used to being straight A students, and it's like a mental breakdown of like, I didn't get an A, I got an A minus, I got a B minus, I got a C plus. Those are all normal grades in Ireland, and I think a benefit in UCD is that your first year GPA doesn't count towards your final GPA. It's like a freebie. You just have to pass your classes, and then you go on, so you get time to adjust.
I love that. For Australia, same. I just spoke to alumni last week, and she's like, I was a straight A student here, and I got my first C or something like that. But she spoke to the professor, and they're super transparent about how they grade as well. If they have any questions, American students typically do have questions about that. It's a bit similar in that grading scale there. JC.
Yeah. And I think it would also be a shock if they go to a US university, right? It's just like the change from high school to university, high school to college. Tomoka, you're in Canada. Do you want to comment really quickly on this question?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty similar too. I think there is some slight adjustment, especially because there's probably more exams to take compared to a lot of US universities. So there will be an adjustment, but of course you'll pick up on it. There's going to be access to student services that you can always reach out to even kind of improve that as well. But for the most part, similar answers to everyone else.
Thank you. Okay, final question. I'm going to go around the room. It's a yes or no answer, okay? I'm going to call out your name after I read the question, and then you have to say yes or no. This is the question. With the explosion of interest for US students to study across borders, do you anticipate becoming more selective for admission? I'm going to read that again. With the explosion of interest for US students to study across borders, do you anticipate becoming more selective for admission? UCD, what do you say?
No, but apply earlier because we're rolling. I can't just say yes or no. But no, just apply earlier.
Okay, Emma from James Cook.
No, again, apply early and exclude medicine and dentistry. That's all I have to say.
What do you think, Sarah?
I'm leaning more towards yes, just because of the uptick in applications and the same number of spots. So yes, but apply early.
But it's important to know that you have a lot of US students too, right?
Yep. We
So-
have over 20% of our student body coming from the US.
So that is a huge factor that, you know, many other universities won't consider. It just we won't see. Tomoka, what do you say?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay, thank you. I love that answer. It's short and sweet. For Middlesex University, no, I don't think that we'll become more selective for admission. Again, our admissions criteria does not depend on numbers necessarily. It depends on students' qualifications. It depends on the curriculum. It depends, most importantly, on the fitness of the student to the university that they're applying for. And with this, we close our session. But first, I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to move on to the next slide. Yeah.
All right, some upcoming events I have you if you haven't heard already. The nearest one is our NACAC conference reception happening on September 18th. So if you will be at the NACAC conference in Columbus, Ohio, we would love to see you there and to stop by. And then we'll also be having our tours coming up. The first one going to be in November in Texas. So there will be a few cities that will be stopping by, and it'll be listed on our AIRR-NA website as well. So if you as a counselor would like to join in on our counselor luncheons, we will be hosting those in certain cities. And then if you or your students are living near those close areas, we also partner with high schools in those local areas to also do international university fairs. And so that'll be the same for both the Texas, East, and West Coast tours. So hope to see you all there. And feel free to register through the QR code or just register through the website. And thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.